And we will now move into having Detlev Fischer doing a short introduction for us. So Detlev is the, I think, owner and CEO of DIAS, a German accessibility expert company, and also a great researcher and very good colleague. And he was also participating in the workshop yesterday and has promised to give us some highlights of what the monitoring discussions ended up with. And it's a hard task to do that quickly. I know that, but thank you for.
Yeah, hello everyone. We had this workshop yesterday, and it was very lively, and there were tons of things mentioned and lots of interesting exchanges. So what I can give you is just a tiny overview of what we talked about there. There were representatives of public sector bodies, of the monitoring agencies of, I think, 8 member states, end user experts, also someone from ETSI, the standards body that's developing the European norm, and also some accessibility experts like myself and some others who were managing the discussion and trying to summarize it. The idea was that, I think Susanna had this idea that we should be moving around, so it was quite a lively thing because everyone got to talking to everyone else nearly. So it was that was a very good format, I think. So it was one of the really exciting event yesterday. The topics we had, among others, were the first joint session was on the European norm 301-549, and Mike Gluck was there from the ETSI standards body to explain that. And then we had also a session on monitoring and reporting. And I'll just cover those 2 things because other things will be covered, I think, later by Peter. In the joint session, so Mike gave a little bit of a history of the European norm that's then, being used as a point of reference for the Web Accessibility Directive via these annexes that are in there. And that has led to the situation since many of the requirements which go beyond WCAG and this annex, that many monitoring agencies didn't really test those. So we know that from the evaluation of the implementation that many monitoring bodies just took WCAG to test. And I need to take off my glasses because I can't read my own handwriting. So. And the interesting thing is, I mean, many of the other things that are in there and that are referenced in the annexes aren't applicable now. There are things on real-time text. There are things on which are relevant for video conferencing, for authoring systems or technical documentation. Many of these things don't really apply in many of the audits that the monitoring agencies do, but it's good to have them in there because it's a way of future-proofing. So when we have websites that later contain say online video, then suddenly these things like real-time text and how can sign language and how can people who can't speak and how can they be represented equally become very important. And so it's good, I think, to have them in there and also to include them in monitoring. One issue which was raised in the discussion was that there are no understanding texts for those extra requirements. We have the WCAG success criteria where we have these understanding texts which help evaluating, how should we look at this, how should we test this. That doesn't exist for the others. And Mike pointed out that that's quite difficult to do because the standard is so broad. It covers everything from self-service terminals to smartwatches. So how could you have an understanding text that takes into account all these different scenarios of application? Another thing that was mentioned was that it's quite difficult to use a PDF. You know that the EN is a PDF thing which you download, and many people pointed out that this is very hard to use. It's also harder for automatic translation. It's harder for referencing if you want to link to it. So that was one big wish to make that possible, that there's an HTML version at least. And Mike also pointed out that it's down to the standards body and the inertia of the standards process that that's not easy to happen. He wanted it to happen, but and someone else mentioned maybe it's not just changing the course of the tanker, but just adding a little engine, to generate this additional thing and let the tanker run on. So the final point on the EN is that the EN is welcoming contributions. So there's an ETSI GitLab point where you can create issues. You can also mail issues if you have any to the web, to the mail address given by Etsy. Next thing on monitoring, there were a lot of discussion on how do we do monitoring. Some monitoring bodies have centralized registries, which is interesting because it gives them a better overview of the state of things, how many public bodies have entered their statements in there, are they improving or not. One thing that's apparent, at least in the German context, is that many of the public bodies still don't have an accessibility statement published. So, and that creates, of course, a problem for users with disabilities. Where do you complain if you don't have an address to complain in the website, if they don't know it? So many struggle, at least in the German context, the main perceived struggle I see is that they want to get those public bodies to at least publish that statement so people can complain and know what the status is. Then there was a lot of discussion on the simplified monitoring methodology. You probably know that there's the in-depth monitoring, where there's a full audit for the sites in monitoring, and there's a simplified monitoring, which is not specified exactly in the Implementation Act of the Web Accessibility Directive. So member states are free to pick and choose their method of doing this. And as you can imagine, they have taken quite different avenues to do this. So some do it fully automatically, like Norway. Others have an automatic approach and add some manual testing, like the UK, and still others make a mainly manual approach where they just take a select number of success criteria and a select number of pages and test those, like Germany. So the question then was, since these approaches are so different, do we need something to harmonize that, to basically prescribe a methodology for the simplified testing so there's better comparability? And that's an open question, whether that's possible, whether the European member states would actually buy into one joint methodology. So that's a question really for us to work out. That's it from the workshop. So I hope I've saved some time.
Thank you very much, Detlev. And I think we need another microphone. Peter, where's the, we have another speaker for the panel. Olaf, if you would like to join, yes.
Am I supposed to stay?
Yes, you're supposed to stay here. Yes. So thank you very much for this overview. So we now have this distinguished panel of Detlev and Olaf. I can't say your last name, so can you please?
Schoelink.
Yeah, I will not say that.
No
so
worries.
It's beautiful, but I can't say it. And then online, I hope we have Paweł.
Hello.
Hi. Good to hear you. We hear you, and you hear us. Oh,
yes.
Technology is working. That's fantastic. So, so really good to have you here as well. And Paweł is the content creator of the Polish NGO for visually impaired, I think, and also doing some monitoring work. And we have met before when you were also working for the Commission in different ways. So also a very knowledgeable person here joining us online. And I would like to start with asking all three of you, maybe starting with Olaf. So we are now 3 years after kind of all websites and apps should be accessible, and still here we are. We know that that is not really the case. So is monitoring working, or is something else needed?
Well, monitoring is always working because we know what's going on, and even stagnation is kind of always a good view. We needed some kind of viewpoint. So monitoring is always a good point, at least in my perspective, for the Dutch perspective. When it comes to how we do the monitoring, things could be a little bit better. The harmonizing would be a great thing for at least the Netherlands, in the case that we would know how others are doing and what they are doing better, because we're trying to learn, we try to improve how we could do things better, but we don't know because there are different statuses. I mean, most member countries use 3 statuses, we use 5. And most of in the categories, most are partially compliant. And that's not very helpful. Is that like 10%, 80%? Like which ones are doing great so we can follow them up? And that's what we would like to see. And once in 3 years, it's maybe not enough. I mean, from a practical viewpoint, it's kind of logical not to do it every year, but we need more data to know how we're doing, what we could improve, so we can adjust more quickly than we are doing now.
Yes, so thank you. And I remember from yesterday you saying that if we see that somebody else is doing better than us, then we would like to try what they are doing. So it would be, the comparison would not be to kind of name and shame or give a prize to somebody, but really to improve each member states, or at least try new things. And if somebody tried something that didn't work out, then the others don't need to make the same mistakes. So that's
exactly that.
So, okay, Paweł, so from your perspective, more the end user perspective, what do you think about the monitoring? Does it really help in your perspective? Do you think it's a good tool for improving accessibility for end users?
So definitely what has happened in the positive aspect is that accessibility is on the tongues of people. So more people than before actually know that the term exists, from governmental organizations, employees, to teachers at schools. And I heard this also in my private circles. Somebody chatted with me, oh, we had this training about accessibility. So definitely the term is more known and it's being talked about, which is always good. And of course we can see some fruits of this work, because we can see that some websites, at least to some extent, and apps are accessible enough that we can use them. I see the biggest challenge here being that often this work is being assigned to people who traditionally don't come from this field. So it's one of these responsibilities that has to be done because, well, another kind of law came upon the institutions, so we have to fulfill it. And somebody has to do it. In Polish, there is this nice phrase, maybe some other Slavic speakers can share this sentiment, chodźmy zróbcie, which can be roughly translated, like ideally we would say, let's go and do it. Here what is often said is, let's go, you do it. And it means that it's often shunted into different departments that are somehow related, but not entirely. And it means that staff that wasn't in this field before receives some kind of express training, and they have to become experts, maybe not overnight, but quite quickly. And even which can't fully take into consideration the breadth of everything that accessibility is. And even if they actually get the education they need, soon after they will change their positions, somebody else will come in their place, and the whole story starts from anew. So I think the need for education and staffing for this kind of job is very, very important and key to the success of this endeavor.
Yes, true. So we are touching on the skills and the needs for experts again, and we have a whole panel on that later on. But I agree, of course, it's the monitoring as such, even though whatever methodology we have, if people are not knowledgeable enough to carry it out, it won't help. So very good views there from you, Paweł. And from Detlev, if I ask you as an accessibility expert and standards nerd, is monitoring helpful?
Well, it's difficult to tell for me. I'm not a monitoring body, but I've followed up a little bit on how things worked in Germany, which is complex because there are, I think, 18 federal states, and they all have their own monitoring bodies. And they have agreed on a common methodology, testing 20 success criteria and changing that set each monitoring period. And but there are quite a lot of differences in how much effort and love is going to be put into that monitoring, which you can see that some federal states have like very little resources for this, a fifth of one position, and others have created 3 new positions. So, and obviously that tells you something about the kind of interest and effort that's going into this. But I agree, I've seen some of the monitoring reports, not always, the people who do it are not always that knowledgeable. So there may be mistakes, and then the public body comes back and says, you know, you said this here, it's not true. And that can create difficulties, obviously, if that's not done well. And the other issue I see is that there was for some of the monitoring bodies, there seems to be the idea that this simplified monitoring gives you a full picture of the accessibility. And since it's only 20 of, I don't know how many, 60 requirements, it is only a partial picture. And so I think it's quite important in monitoring to point out that this is just a warning shot, if you like, that there are things wrong and you have to do a full audit to get to the bottom of it. So that's a bit of a problem. But That's all I can say to that.
So what's interesting, you were kind of really doing the overall perspective of monitoring, but I was thinking a little bit more close to your business. So from a business perspective, does monitoring help in kind of creating new business or making your clients more aware or something, just from putting your accessibility expert hat on?
Well, I mean, it gives us some work, which is nice. So we get some commissions to do some of these tests, which is nice. But I can't really tell whether that's money well spent. I know that there's criticism that some people in the German community say, why is so much money spent on all this auditing? You know, shouldn't they spend the money on actually producing things in a better way? And that's, I think that's a fair criticism, even though we are personally benefiting from all the monitoring. I wouldn't be so sure that the impact is that the money is best spent. I can't tell really. Does that answer your question, or was it
yes?
Still something else?
No, absolutely. Okay. No, it's an interesting perspective. I think that we see in other member states that accessibility experts claim that because public sector are maybe worried about or happy to be monitored, but they would then they kind of start focusing on accessibility, and that can be seen in increased demand for training, increased demand for recruitment, and so on. So I think that we can see in the market as a whole that the monitoring, the possibility of being monitored makes people start thinking. But we can ask a monitoring body if you have seen the same thing with the, you don't interview the public sector bodies in the Netherlands, but do you think that the fact that you're monitoring them are kind of making them behave better or do things?
Well, I won't say that they behave better, but they're actually doing things like they want to behave better, which also can lead to the fact that they're trying to solve the problem very quickly, like we had in the last subject with the overlays. So, but they are trying to fix it, and that's one kind of thing. There is a higher demand for training, but then there's the question from, okay, and what is a good training? So it helps with bringing the subject to the table, but it's not mature enough to say, okay, we have found a solution due to monitoring.
Okay, many good aspects there. I still think it's kind of cool that we do this monitoring and that it's the biggest monitoring ever made, I think, in accessibility at this scale. So I think I'm more positive than you are on this. But
positive.
Yeah, no, it's not helping for everything, but I think it's a good tool and it's a step forward. So I wanted to ask Paweł about the accessibility statements. So they are meant to provide relevant information both for the monitoring agencies and also, or maybe in my case, more relevant, I think, for the end users. So when you look at accessibility statements, do you find them good for either of those purposes, or what's the situation of accessibility statements in Poland and in your experience?
Yeah, so I think it's great that they are there because the concept is thought of in such a way that before you reach the depths of the website, and from my perspective as a blind user, I can say these websites, especially the complex institutional websites, can be quite daunting. So at least I have an overview of what I have to expect and what not to expect. Again, I will be boring about this today, and I'm really sorry, but coming back to the point about education, stemming from what I said in my previous point, and I know we'll come back to this again, but because not everyone is equally educated in assessing their strengths and the points that are asking for improvements, these declarations are sometimes overshooting on what is being promised. So a declaration can contain a statement like we do this properly or perfectly, and then we can realize it's not the truth. So more education in the area of also self-assessing what the progress is realistically that has been made and what is still there to be done. This would be really, really welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, Detlev. Accessibility statements, I guess you support your clients writing them sometimes or assessing them. So what's your take on the statement? I know the situation is a little bit delicate in Germany.
Well, I mean, as I said, it's many don't have those statements yet, and that shows the level of reluctance you find in some of the public bodies, especially the smaller cities, smaller communities that they don't know where to take the money, and often it works via their service providers, and so there can be a lot of friction before something happens. And my view is, would people actually look for it? Would they find it? We've discussed it yesterday as well. There should be position of the accessibility statement link, or the link to that. Should that be made mandatory where that is, for example, or should it be part of the skip links and things like that? So we had lots of discussions on that. And I think it also boils down to the question, do users know that they can complain? So it's down to maybe the organizations of people with disabilities to educate their members that they can complain and encourage them to complain, so that people will actually start looking for the statement and also looking for the feedback mechanism. So, I mean, I think in many cases, people will just want to use the site and get irritated when it doesn't work, but will they look for the statement? And then if they want to look, will they find it? And if they find it, will they be able to put something in, or will they want to expose themselves to give a feedback? That's difficult to tell. And I think we probably need some empirical research on that, how many people do that, to know more about that. So.
Yeah, so unfortunately, the accessibility statement is not required from the monitoring bodies to actually check the truth of the accessibility statement. That's not legally required, but at least the monitoring agencies are supposed to check that there is an accessibility statement. So that's one thing. So I hope for the next monitoring period in Germany that we will find more accessibility statement at least. And I think in my mind, when we wrote the Implementation Act, I think it was really important to say that, to me, the accessibility statement is also a way to make the public sector bodies think. Because when you kind of self-declare something, at least, I mean, you can lie, but at least you start thinking, and that could be a first step for something. So probably maybe that would help, hopefully. Yeah. So, and from the monitoring perspective here from the Netherlands, you are now representing all the monitoring bodies. I'm sorry about that. But how do you see the accessibility statement, and how do you use them in the Netherlands? Because that is also, you are a little bit more smart, I think, than some of the other countries.
Thank you.
Yeah. Not you personally.
It was not mine either. No. No, we try to be as transparent as possible. We have a dashboard now, which actually states if a organization has a statement or not. So that actually helps with getting the mindset ready for organizations that it's transparent. Even the end users know to find the dashboard. So I don't have to go to all the websites themselves, but they can look in the dashboard, like my municipality. It's a difficult word, but it's not doing great. So I can, and it's knowable, and I can go to the representatives of me and say, okay, we can start a movement. We can actually make this a discussion now, because it's transparent in how we are doing that. We also have more statuses just to make sure that there can be a statement, like you have to start with a statement that you have done no research at all. That there is no underlying report on how you are actually doing, but you're starting the movement from there. So, okay, because you have done that, you have to do a research, you have to plan it in. That's the next status, and then you have a result, and you have to say, okay, I'm not completely compliant. How am I going to solve all these faults we have found? And then you get to the highest status, which, okay, we're fully compliant. So we're having more of a roadmap, which is completely transparent, and we can all see on the Dutch web dashboard. It's to show actually how organizations are doing to start the movement more, and give them a starting point.
So it's more about the process or the progress, I should say, than the actual end. I mean, the end result is also important, but you also kind of show people that they take one step at a time, and that is also making a difference. And I think that is, I mean, thinking about how humans usually work, I think it's a good thing that you appreciate that they have done something. And we did hear from, I can't remember who it was yesterday, but somebody said that we thought that we couldn't publish the statement until we were fully compliant. We had that from somebody.
Oh.
So, yeah, which is a very kind of the opposite way of going. But of course, if you don't want to, we get that question sometimes, that how is it possible that we as a public sector body provide a document where it says that we are not complying with the law? I mean, I can understand that those questions, especially for the legal people
True.
and that,
Yeah.
that they think about it that way. So monitoring could be helpful, statements could be helpful, but clearly it's not the only thing that helps. So how can we, I mean, anyone, any stakeholder here, what can we do to support the public sector bodies to actually improve even more? I mean, except for the monitoring, what is needed? What do you think the public sector bodies do need to become better? Do you have an idea, Olaf?
When it comes to the parties that do the reports, we find a lot of differences in quality, and we're looking for a solution with certification or anything just to try to maintain a quality insurance that you have when you have a statement. It is good, like because we have the WCAG EM, like the evaluation method, and we still see that it doesn't work as much. There's too less of expertise when it comes to the researchers who do the testing, to have like a good comparison internally in the Netherlands, because when we do rechecks and other organizations do the same studies, they find very different points, which should not be the case. I mean, some points are open for interpretation, but to find like, okay, where you're fully compliant to, oh no, you only have like 10 criteria, that's quite a big difference. So we that should help a lot to like good certification.
Yes, so that is one thing that IAAP tries to fix with certification. So that's good to hear that is maybe a good idea. Detlev, what do you think? What does the public sector body?
Well, one thing is more organizational. That's just an anecdotal thing. Talking to one of our customers, which is one of the federal states, they mentioned it's difficult for them. They perceive that there are some of the public bodies who have severe issues, but they can't contact them directly because some other ministry or some other representative is responsible for contacting them. So they're basically not allowed to engage with them unless they're in the sample, which is an interesting thing. I mean, they're not basically, it's not our deal. They're entering someone else's turf. And those are political problems which maybe can be solved, or would be good to solve. In terms of the quality, it's interesting also that the idea was with a simplified monitoring was non-conformance. So you just need to find a few spots where you know this is clearly a failure and you report that and that's it. But some of the more engaged public bodies, they also want to go a bit beyond that, and they want to give interesting feedback to the public bodies, even on that limited set of things that are tested, which means more work for the auditors and more higher level of competence in giving actually useful feedback. You know, you just don't tell them your heading structure is not all right, but you tell them you've got an interesting heading structure here with a top line and another heading, and you put that into one heading, for example, so that it's both given out as a heading. Things like that, which you don't get from just going by a rote process or using automated tools. And that kind of skill is useful for the public bodies. But of course, it makes it a lot more time-consuming and expensive, in turn expensive to carry out those evaluations. So that's one of the observations I can give.
Yeah, and I think that's very important that the monitoring bodies in general don't just police things, but also support and train, and that's also in the directive. So, but I think in the review we saw at least what the monitoring agencies told us that they were doing those things, and I think that the communication between the monitoring agency and the public sector body is really important. That is kind of on a positive note and trying to support as much as possible. And I know many member states are doing a really good job also doing guidelines in their own languages and trying to kind of explain the requirements in more human language and so on. So definitely. So Paweł, I'll leave the last word in the panel before we go to the questions from the audience to you as an end user. And now you cannot answer training, please say something else. But what is the public sector bodies? What do they need except for training?
Mm-hmm. What I think I would say as an end user and potential accessibility, let's say evaluator and tester, would be the evaluation of the current accessibility tools that are being used for the monitoring, because at the moment it's quite difficult to tell what can I do as a blind person in the field of accessibility. Clearly, I know my screen readers, and that's great. I use the internet every day. So I had to learn all this terminology like headings, radio buttons, combo boxes, list tables, and what they do and why they are important. What next? So I could probably advise on accessibility, but in what department? Okay, I can tell about screen readers, but maybe also I could do at least automated audits, because this is the ability that the tool does a lot of the work, but I have to interpret the results. I have to know where the errors come up. I can relate them to my own experience, and I can let the party responsible know where the mistake has occurred and how to fix it. The problem is, from my testing, that only one tool I have tested so far was accessible enough that I could tell, okay, the error has occurred here and here in that and that line, and I can directly let this person know what to do. So this is one thing. Another thing would be the templates for the compliance reports, which also we have nice wizards for creating this template and templates for creating the report templates and the reports themselves. But are they fully accessible? So we could focus on the fact, is the job of an accessibility consultant / auditor accessible to those who have access needs? Such a meta question.
That's a very good point. Thank you very much, Paweł. I think that is extremely useful. And also, I mean, that goes back to what Catherine also said about the intranet and extranets and all the working environment for people with disabilities. That is kind of sometimes forgotten. We focus so much on the external websites that we forget that we have staff, and that staff also need accessibility. So that's kind of is a bigger question, but really, really important. And of course, many accessibility testers or evaluators also do have disabilities. So that's a very good point. Thank you for that, Paweł. So I would like to ask again, everyone that's writing super smart questions in the chat, to use the Q&A function, because that is so much easier for me to see because of my bad eyesight. But we have some questions for the panelists. So the first one is, are there initiatives to improve the readability of accessibility statements? They are formulated for legal and tech specialists. So I think that is, I don't know who wants to, does anyone know of any initiatives on that? Paweł, are you aware? Detlev?
Well, I mean, we normally recommend when we are asked what should go into the statement to make sure that it's not written in non-technical terms. So that we're not talking about, say, specific success criteria that have been violated, for example, because those numbers mean nothing to them, but rather say it's difficult to access this with a keyboard, for example, or put it into terms which are easy to understand. And the solution, I think, would be to have a very simple, easy to read version of it, and then have if you want to, you have basically a version below, or a link to a version below where you get more technical details for those that need them, or linked directly to an online report that has all the details. So that would be one way of dealing with that. In terms of automated, I mean, I know that automated, simplified, or automated plain language versions are getting much more feasible. So I think in a few years' time, we'll probably have a much better success with creating a simplified version automatically. But I think it's probably better to formulate it the way that you think it's understandable, and possibly also test it with other users, with non-technical people. Do they understand what's in there? So.
Yeah, we have some examples from a couple of member states where they actually provide templates for the accessibility statements, but also those are very kind of legalistic and very hard to read for end users. So I think the whole idea of accessibility statements are really focusing on the legal parts and supporting the monitoring agencies. And I understand why, because if you get a legal requirement, you want to meet that. But I really think that is something we can help each other to improve that. I also don't know about anyone trying to make sure that the accessibility statement as such become more readable, but there are many other initiatives out there. And I think many of us experts try to encourage at least our clients to do readable accessibility statements. But that would be interesting to look into later on. So another question is interesting. What is the percentage of full compliant websites in the EU, both in public and private? Is there anyone? And is full compliance a realistic goal? So I don't think anyone has the number, but Olaf, is it a realistic goal to have full compliance if we just take the public sector, which is kind of your responsibility?
Kind of. Well, it depends. If you look at it like you can test it in a certain point of time and you can solve all the things, then you can be fully compliant. But a total accessible website, during the whole period that it's online, I don't think that's actually doable. At least how I understand the directive, it's an ongoing process, and you have to work to that. Like, and you want to stay in that 90-95 mark and don't have like critical failures, but there always will be small mistakes which don't have maybe have an amazing impact or a great impact on the end user, but they're still there. So if you look at like a 100% compliance, like everything is totally accessible, I don't think that's possible.
Okay,
but that's maybe more personal statement.
No, I've heard that from many people over the years. So Paweł, what do you think? Is there some such thing as a fully compliant website?
I think accessibility is a journey, and this is what a lot of experts say as well. And this is not just a blank statement. We all know that today's web applications, because more often than actual websites, we come across web applications, very complex code structures. They evolve all the time. Something is changing a lot of the time. New content arrives, old content departs. And while we might have had the good idea at the beginning, and the structure as a whole functions as it should, one document can arrive, which will be an untagged PDF. And then are we fully compliant? Not really, because this one document is not really accessible to persons who use assistive technologies. So it's a journey, and it's made by many people at once in different teams, and it evolves all the time. So realistic, maybe yes, if the resources are put together and everyone remembers to do everything all the time. But yeah, we don't live in an ideal world, so I think it will just happen because humans make mistakes. It's important to receive the reports in due time and fix them as they appear. But I think today's websites and web applications evolve at such a fast pace that mistakes and errors and problems will occur, unfortunately. As I said, it's important to catch them and to correct them as they appear.
Yes, thank you, Paweł. And Detlev, do you have anything more to add to that?
Well, at least from a perspective of someone testing a lot of sites in the simplified testing currently, we can say that all of them have some issues. So, but sometimes you can see a clear difference between those which have done nothing, which are terrible, and those which have reworked their site and are pretty good, but there's still some issues. So, and I think the monitoring and other audits would help them to identify those things and fix them. So it's not completely impossible for them to have a fully accessible site. It's of course also down to the way the auditor applies that idea of tolerances. You know, you could have, there's so many things that can go wrong, and sometimes they're really minor. There may be some things, you may have some inline markup, which is not correct, but which is not a real barrier. And the question is, can we account for those tolerances and say, well, it's more or less, it's okay, it's quite good. There's some issues, but we still call it a pass. And WCAG, as you know, has only pass-fail. So you have to make a decision there. Do you say it's a fail or is it a pass? The German monitoring bodies have decided to also have a rating which is called im Wesentlichen bestanden, which means overall pass. So there are some issues, but we call it a pass. And I think that's quite helpful because it gives an indication that's not all correct, but on the whole, we can call it a pass. So that may be one way out. And I know that WCAG 3, which is in development, it will take many years to be completed, will have a more fine-grained and less kind of pass-fail oriented approach to rating and establishing conformance. So that's quite welcome in my perspective.
Which all sounds very nice, but then for the legislature, I think the kind of sliding scale is going to be difficult, or at least somebody needs to figure out how to measure that in a good way. So we have another question here. If you had the ear of the executive leadership of the public sector bodies, how would you convince them to prioritize digital accessibility within their institution and to give it resources, time, budget, and visibility? I don't know if this is a hypothetical question or if we have the ear of the executive leadership here, but Olaf, how do you sell digital accessibility?
You show it. with the help of end users. That's the only way, because we're all saying that's important, but everything is important nowadays. But to show how someone can be struggling with such a simple thing, at least what you would find as executive very easy, like I can read the site, I can go through it. You see another person, okay, 2 clicks, now I'm done. I cannot do this. And then you get like, then you actually, when you see it, you know it, and then you feel the urge to actually do something about it.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. I cannot agree more. So, Paweł, can you add something more than showing with end user perspectives? Is there another way to convince public sector bodies?
I think I will agree here. This is we have to realize that accessibility is not a requirement for requirement's sake. And while we discuss guidelines, and they are of course important, they are guiding lines, right? So we orientate around them when we have no idea. But in the end, at the end of the day, it's about the users. It's about us. It's about people like Tanya, like I, like many in this room. If you make it, we can use it. If you don't make it, we can't. And I know it sounds a bit harsh. This is why it's important to show real life examples. And I think a lot of us will be happy to do it and present that actually it's not done just to satisfy another requirement, but to actually help people and to have more citizens who engage with you and who may give or not your vote in the future.
Yes, that's a very good point as well. So, Detlev, do you have anything to add?
Well, maybe there's a way of making public bodies understand that their internet sites or the sites of their main attractions in a city, for example, are also part of the public infrastructure. I mean, they take pride in creating new bicycle paths and having accessible this and that. But I think one can make the case that the websites and everything that leads, for example, visitors to those sites is equally important. And once they understand that, they will want to make those more accessible. So that could be an incentive. You know, there are also good examples, I think, good examples from other places might convince them that it's worthwhile putting some more effort into that. So.
Yeah, very good ideas. So if we had the ear of this leadership, then these are the recommendations that we would like to provide. So I wanted to kind of connected to that also get back to something we talked about yesterday, because we talked about the need for comparison and also monitoring maybe being more kind of streamlined so that we know what is happening in the different countries. And there was one idea saying that, okay, that will be extremely hard to do. So why don't we instead try to kind of measure how the users perceive or how they what they, if the users are happy with or satisfied with the website, then that should be kind of the 5-star. And then if they're, you know, instead of doing the criteria and trying to do percentages and all of that, instead kind of turning it on their head and say we try to test with users in some kind of streamlined way. I don't really know how that would work out, but what, just from a monitoring perspective, what do you think it would be possible to create such a, I mean, it's a large scale user testing thing that has a lot of challenges, but just your spontaneous thoughts about the idea of letting the users decide about kind of not compliance, but satisfaction. Would that be, isn't it an interesting idea?
It is indeed interesting. At least in the Netherlands, we don't look at accessibility as one part or the only part. We look at understandability and user experience as well. So we try to see it in a broader perspective, just like that viewpoint that you're suggesting now. So I do not know how difficult it will be if we try to do it, but to do a study or try to get to that point that we're looking to this end user perspective as the basis on how we're trying to improve things, that would be great.
Yeah, but no one, we didn't really solve how yesterday, but we discussed the possibility. So Detlev, what do you think? And I know we have discussed kind of automatic and manual testing and pros and cons before. So could you just briefly, what do you think? Is it possible to do something?
I was just trying to imagine that would happen with a particular user, one user, and they would be, say, someone with visual impairments would be shown the website of Elbphilharmonie, which is one of the, you know, the lighthouse buildings in Hamburg, which Hamburg is very proud about, and they would think it's really wonderful, good contrast and everything. But the main menu is completely hidden for screen reader users with ARIA hidden. So you never get to the navigation, right? And someone who's not using a screen reader would never find that. They would basically praise the site, but there are grave issues. So one has to be very careful. I think it can only be a kind of supplementary thing, or you'd have to have a mix of users to discover whether it's really accessible across the board. And that obviously would incur quite a lot of costs. So the public sector would probably not be willing to enter that. But if they do, I think it has to be worked out quite well that it's an additional thing or a broad thing. So
I think the idea would to kind of pick all the user needs kind of when it was discussed. But and Paweł, I don't know if you would like to reflect on that, the idea of having users testing as an addition. I mean, you already said that you need to do user testing, but for a comparison, would it be useful to have users test different websites and compare them?
I think definitely yes. I don't think we would need to scrap the guidelines altogether, if that's what I understood from the discussion, or to replace them with 100% of user testing, because the basis is there, and it's good to start with something that is written and fixed, and it's, so to say, in the law. But definitely user testing is mandatory. I have seen a lot of apps where the intent was there, the good intentions were there, but the testing lacked, and as a result the app was unusable. There was, for example, a lot of extraneous verbiage. The screen reader would say a lot, not necessarily all that I needed to know at a given time. Well, but the focus would jump all over the place. So as a result, can I use this app? No, I can't. So it's always like this kind of work is done for the people. It's not done for the law or for automatic checkers to say, okay, you're fine. In the end, people will use this website or app, and it's important to check whether they really can, because, well, otherwise money spent and not much output, unfortunately.
Very true. So I want to also quote from the chat that excellent contributions from the panelists. So thank you, and I can only agree with that. So thank you, all of you, for being with us here today and sharing your experiences. And now, the ones of us who are in Brussels, we will actually go for lunch. And for the rest of you, I hope that you also get lunch from somewhere else. And then we will meet again at 1 o'clock Central European time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.